The polished mahogany table felt like a coffin. It was long, dark, and held a death certificate inside a sheaf of papers that would officially end the marriage of Alex and Clara Monroe. Alex stared at the wood grain, tracing its intricate patterns with his eyes. It was a more interesting and certainly more honest landscape than the face of his soon-to-be ex-wife, which was currently arranged in a mask of triumphant pity. Clara, ever the performer, sighed theatrically. "Look, Alex, I want to be fair." Her voice was a melody of condescension she had perfected over a decade. Her lawyer, a man with a jawline as sharp and unforgiving as his billing practices, sat impassively. Alex's own lawyer, a kind but beleaguered public defender out of his depth, shuffled papers nervously. "I'll take the house," Clara continued, as if bestowing a great favor. "It's too much for you to manage anyway, and frankly, the memories." She let the sentence hang, a wisp of manufactured sentiment in the sterile air of the legal office. The house was a sprawling five-bedroom testament to Alex's early success as an architect, a home he had designed and built, a place where every line and angle held a piece of his soul. She had filled it with her friends, her parties, her ever-expanding collection of things that glittered. "I'll also need the investment portfolio and the joint savings," she added, her tone becoming brisk, businesslike. "My new venture requires capital, and since you were never much of a risk-taker, it's best I handle the finances." Her new venture was a boutique, a vanity project funded by her father, and now, it seemed, by the complete liquidation of their shared life. Alex remained silent. His stillness seemed to unnerve her more than any argument would have. He wasn't playing his part. He wasn't the broken, pleading man she had imagined. "And for you, Alex," she said, leaning forward, the mask of pity returning, "I don't want to leave you with nothing." She gestured to a line item on the settlement agreement. "You can have the old family plot, the Northfield." A small, sharp laugh escaped her lawyer's lips, which he quickly disguised as a cough. The Northfield. 30 acres of rock-strewn, weed-choked land 15 miles out of town, inherited from Clara's grandfather, who had himself declared it God's most stubborn mistake. It was useless. It was landlocked by other properties, had no water access, and was zoned for agricultural use it couldn't even support. It was an albatross, a piece of their portfolio so worthless they often forgot they owned it. It was her final, perfect insult, a gift that was actually a burden. "That seems generous," Alex said, his voice quiet but even. It was the first thing he had said in an hour. Clara beamed, misinterpreting his calm for defeat. "I thought so. You always liked wandering around out there, getting your boots muddy. I figured it suited you." The implication was clear. He was being returned to the dirt from which she imagined he'd come. Alex picked up the pen. He didn't look at the clauses giving away the house he'd built, the money he'd earned, the life he'd thought was his. He found the line item for the Northfield. He drew a neat, firm circle around it, and then he signed his name. Clara thought she had won. She had the house, the friends, the life she believed she deserved. She had left him with nothing but a patch of dirt and weeds, a final monument to his failure in her eyes. What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Alex wasn't just an architect. He was an urban planner who specialized in municipal infrastructure forecasting. And for the last 18 months, he had been tracking the quiet, fiercely debated progress of the Northern Gateway Transit Project. He knew that the city, desperate for expansion, was about to push a new light rail line and a 6-lane expressway straight through the heart of the county. He knew the proposed route, and he knew that the single most valuable parcel of land for the project's central commercial and residential hub was a useless 30-acre plot currently known as the Northfield. Within 6 months, her world, built on the illusion of her own superiority, would crumble. His, founded on patience and hidden knowledge, would be rebuilt, stronger and more magnificent than anything she could possibly imagine. He slid the signed papers across the polished mahogany. The funeral was over. His new life was about to begin. We love telling stories about quiet strength and hidden triumphs. If you're enjoying this journey of vindication, do us a favor and hit that like button. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of the fallout, because the real drama is just getting started. The first few weeks were a study in diminishment. Alex moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat downtown. The air was perpetually thick with the scent of fabric softener and the rhythmic thumping of industrial dryers, a constant churning reminder of his new, reduced circumstances. He'd traded sweeping views of the oak-lined hills from the house he designed for a single window that looked out onto a brick wall. His life had been condensed, packed into cardboard boxes, and stacked against the walls of his new, temporary existence. He didn't mind. It was a cocoon, not a cage. One crisp autumn afternoon, as he was carrying a bag of groceries home, a sleek, pearl-white convertible purred to a stop beside him. It was Clara. Of course, it was Clara. She was behind the wheel, sunglasses perched on her head like a tiara, a man with teeth too white and a tan too orange in the passenger seat. This had to be Marcus, the venture capitalist she had been talking about. "Alex, oh my God, I almost didn't recognize you," she called out, her voice echoing in the quiet street. It was a performance for an audience of one, Marcus. She was showcasing the contrast, displaying her ex-husband like a relic in a museum of her past life. Alex simply nodded, shifting the weight of the grocery bag. "Clara, Marcus." Marcus gave him a dismissive once-over, his gaze lingering on Alex's worn jeans and simple cotton shirt. "So this is the famous Alex," Marcus said, his voice smooth and oily. He didn't extend a hand. "Clara's told me so much about you." "I'm sure she has," Alex replied, his tone neutral. He could feel the heat of their judgment, a palpable wave of condescension. He refused to let it burn him. "What are you doing in this part of town?" Clara asked, her eyes flicking from Alex to the slightly grimy entrance of his apartment building. "Just running errands?" "I live here," Alex said without shame or apology. A flicker of something, glee perhaps, danced in Clara's eyes before she replaced it with her signature mask of concern. "Oh, Alex, here?" She looked at Marcus, a shared, silent communication passing between them. See how far he's fallen?" "It's temporary," Alex said, though he offered no further explanation. Clara reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a wallet. With a flourish, she extracted 2 crisp $100 bills. She held them out to him. "Here," she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper, "for groceries, or whatever. Don't be proud, Alex. Let me help." The gesture was a masterpiece of humiliation. It was public. It was patronizing. It was designed to frame him as a charity case and her as a magnanimous saint. The $200 was not a gift. It was a branding iron, meant to sear the mark of her superiority onto him in front of her new man. The street seemed to fall silent. The whir of the laundromat dryers, the distant traffic, it all faded away. Alex looked at the money in her outstretched hand. He looked at her perfectly manicured fingers. Then he looked into her eyes. "That won't be necessary, Clara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm fine." "Don't be ridiculous," she insisted, pushing the money closer. "Take it. It's the least I can do." "No," he said. The word was not angry, not bitter. It was a simple, solid fact. A closed door. He adjusted his grip on his grocery bag, the plastic crinkling. "But thank you for the offer." He gave a slight nod, a gesture that encompassed both Clara and Marcus, and then he turned and walked toward his building. He did not look back. He did not need to see the mixture of fury and confusion on Clara's face, the smug smirk on Marcus's. He could feel it radiating behind him. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the scent of bleach and hot cotton growing stronger. Inside his apartment, he set the groceries on the small kitchenette counter. He stood for a moment in the quiet, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. He was not angry. He was not humiliated. He was focused. Every insult, every condescending glance was merely fuel. He walked over to a simple desk by the brick wall window. On it, next to a stack of architectural journals, was a plain manila envelope. He picked it up. The paper was crisp, uncreased. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew what was inside. The deed to the North Field. He ran his thumb along the edge of the envelope. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a promise. It was a blueprint. It was a silent counter-argument to the entire world Clara was trying to build around him. She had offered him $200 as a symbol of his worth in her new reality. He held in his hand a document worth millions, a symbol of the reality that was about to dawn. He placed the envelope back on the desk, perfectly aligned with the edge. Then, he began to unpack his groceries. The work had to continue. The final obligatory performance was a dinner at her parents' house. Richard and Eleanor Vance had always treated Alex with a kind of polite bewilderment. He was a quiet, steady man who built things with his hands and his mind, a foreign concept to Richard, who had inherited his wealth, and Eleanor, who had married into it. To them, Alex was a project Clara had taken on, one that had now evidently failed. They gathered in the formal dining room, a space so suffocatingly perfect it felt like a museum exhibit on wealthy suburban life. The chandelier dripped crystals over a table set with china that was older and more valuable than Alex's car. Marcus was there, of course, seated in the chair Alex used to occupy, holding court with a story about his latest disruptive tech investment. "It's all about seeing the value where others don't, Richard," Marcus proclaimed, swirling a glass of obscenely expensive red wine. "You have to be 10 steps ahead of the market. The common man, he sees a warehouse. I see a hub for last-mile drone delivery. It's a paradigm shift." Richard nodded enthusiastically, completely captivated. "Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Clara, this young man is a true visionary." Clara preened, placing a hand on Marcus's arm. "He has a gift," she said, her eyes sliding toward Alex at the other end of the table. "Some people are just forward-thinking." The meal was a relentless barrage of thinly veiled insults. Eleanor lamented how wonderful it was that Clara was finally with someone who understood her potential. Richard talked about the importance of a strong portfolio and how some assets, like people, simply fail to perform. Every comment was a stone thrown in Alex's direction. He sat through it all, eating his perfectly cooked but tasteless sea bass, a polite, neutral expression on his face. He was an observer, an anthropologist studying the bizarre rituals of a tribe he no longer belonged to. The main course was cleared, and Eleanor set down a dessert of poached pears. "We were so worried about the settlement, Alex," she began, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. "Clara was just too generous for her own good, but she has such a good heart." "She insisted you get something, of course," Richard chimed in, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "Though for the life of me, I can't imagine what you'll do with that old field. Granddad Vance couldn't even get goats to live on it." Marcus chuckled. "The North Field? Clara told me about that. 30 acres of nothing. A tax liability more than anything. You should see if you can donate it to a bird sanctuary, Alex. Get the write-off." The table laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, not exactly. It was worse. It was a dismissive, pitying laugh. The kind you give to a child who proudly presents a drawing of a six-legged dog. Alex placed his fork down gently beside his plate. He looked across the table, past the flickering candlelight in the crystal glasses, and met Richard's gaze. "It has its own potential," he said, his voice calm and clear. Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Potential? My boy, the only thing that land has the potential to grow is more weeds. I've owned land my whole life. I know a worthless parcel when I see one. Always have. It was this certainty, this absolute unshakable arrogance, that was their collective fatal flaw. They lived in a world of surfaces, of brand names and bottom lines that were easily read. They saw a quiet man and assumed he was weak. They saw a fallow field and assumed it was barren. They could not comprehend a value that wasn't immediately visible, that wasn't listed on a stock ticker or appraised by Sotheby's. Perhaps you're right, Alex said, offering a small, enigmatic smile. The statement hung in the air, a quiet act of defiance that they completely misinterpreted as acquiescence. They heard surrender. He meant, "You will see." Later, as he was putting on his coat to leave, Clara cornered him in the foyer. "I hope tonight wasn't too awkward for you," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "It was informative," he replied, buttoning his coat. "Listen, Alex," she said, her voice dropping. "Marcus was just joking about the field. But he's right, you know. It's a drain. I had my father's accountant look at it. He said, you should sell it, even for a loss, just to get it off your books. He knows a guy who buys up junk parcels for hunting leases. You might get a few thousand for it. It would be a start." She was trying to help in her own twisted, controlling way. She was trying to manage his failure, to tidy it up and put it away. The idea that he might succeed without her, or even in spite of her, was an impossibility in her universe. "I'll keep it in mind," Alex said. He pulled the front door open, letting in a rush of cool night air. "Thank you for the advice, and for dinner." He walked out into the darkness, leaving them behind in their brightly lit fortress of certainty. He got into his modest sedan, a car that now felt like a vessel of freedom. As he drove away, he saw their silhouettes in the window, a perfect family portrait of blissful ignorance. In his mind, he saw another image, a satellite map, overlaid with the blue lines of a new highway and the red circle of a future transit station, glowing brightly over 30 acres of so-called worthless land. They thought he was leaving with nothing. He was driving away with the future. The world saw a man diminished, living in a small apartment, working a quiet job. The reality was a man engaged in the most intense and creative period of his professional life. His small apartment became his command center. The brick wall his window faced was soon covered in corkboards, and those boards were papered with maps, zoning regulations, geological surveys, and transit authority planning documents. His quiet job at a small architectural firm was a cover. He had taken a part-time consulting role that paid the bills, but more importantly, left his mind and his schedule free for his true work. The project had begun 18 months before the divorce, with a hushed conversation over coffee with David Chen, an old friend from his university days who now worked deep within the city's planning department. David was a worrier, a man burdened by the secrets he had to keep. "They're never going to announce it until the land acquisition is locked," David had whispered, stirring his coffee with frantic energy. "It's the Northern Gateway. It's real. They've been fighting about it for years, but the federal infrastructure grant just came through. The mayor's going to make it his legacy." He tapped a location on a napkin. "The corridor is going to run along the old utility easement, just west of Route 7. They need a central hub, a nexus point for commercial, residential, and transport. The topography is a nightmare everywhere except for one spot, a 30, maybe 40-acre plateau, flat, stable bedrock. It's a developer's dream." Alex had felt a jolt, a spark of recognition. "The old Vance property," he'd said, almost to himself. David's eyes had widened. "You know it?" "My wife's family owns it," Alex had replied. We own it." From that moment, Alex had begun a secret, parallel life. By day, he was the accommodating husband, the quiet architect. By night, he was a forensic urbanist, digging through public records, cross-referencing environmental impact statements, and building complex predictive models of the project's trajectory. He learned that the original plan had been diverted due to the discovery of a protected wetland, pushing the ideal hub location directly onto the north field. He tried once to bring it up with Clara. He had spread a survey map on the dining room table one evening. "Honey, look at this. I was looking at the old Northfield property. Given the city's expansion plans," she hadn't even looked up from her magazine. "Alex, please, not your boring maps. Can't you just switch off for one evening? My head is full of invoices from the caterer for the fundraiser. That's the real world, you know." He had quietly rolled up the map. The real world. He had understood then that her reality and his were running on separate, irreconcilable tracks. He had also understood that he would have to walk his path alone. Now, in his small apartment, the work was no longer theoretical. It was a race. He operated with the quiet intensity of a man defusing a bomb, or perhaps building one. He hired a discreet geological survey team, paying them out of his dwindling personal savings to confirm the bedrock stability. The report came back glowing, optimal for high-density construction. He spent weeks in the county records office, tracing the ownership of the adjacent parcels, identifying the key players who would be involved in any future land assembly deal. He created a complete development proposal, not just for his plot, but for the entire 500-acre district. It was a masterpiece of urban design, incorporating green spaces, mixed-use zoning, and a pedestrian-friendly layout. It was the kind of visionary work he'd always dreamed of doing, the work Clara had dismissed as boring maps. He wasn't just planning to sell a piece of land, he was planning to shape the future of a community. One evening, Miss Evelyn Reed, a formidable real estate developer whose name was spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence in the industry, agreed to meet him for a drink. He had been introduced by a mutual acquaintance who vouched for Alex's integrity. Evelyn was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened for an hour without interruption as Alex, using only a few cocktail napkins for illustration, laid out his entire thesis. The transit corridor, the geological advantage, the zoning variance probabilities, and his vision for the development. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, stirring her gin and tonic with a long, slender finger. Alex waited, his heart pounding. Her validation was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Finally, she looked him straight in the eye. "You're either the smartest man I've met in 20 years, or you're completely insane," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "In my business, those are often the same thing. You've done the work, Mr. Monroe. God, have you done the work." She tapped her napkin. "This is more than just a land sale. This is a legacy project. But you're a ghost. No capital, no corporate backing. The big players will try to eat you alive, swallow your parcel for pennies on the dollar once the news breaks." "That's why I'm talking to you," Alex said. "I don't want a buyer. I want a partner." Evelyn Reed's smile widened. "Good, because what you have here isn't just a piece of dirt. It's leverage. It's the keystone. And with the right partnership, the person who holds the keystone doesn't just sell it. They get to approve the design of the whole damn arch." She raised her glass. "Send me the full proposal. Don't talk to anyone else. We, Mr. Monroe, are going to build a city." Alex walked home through the cool night air, the city lights blurring around him. He felt a profound sense of calm, the quiet before the storm. The pieces were all in place. The humiliation, the small apartment, the condescending remarks. They were all part of the camouflage that had allowed him to work, unseen and underestimated. They thought he was hiding from his failure. In reality, he had been hiding his success. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was the glittering apex of the city's social calendar. It was a night for the wealthy to wear their virtue as conspicuously as their diamonds, a competitive pageant of philanthropy and status. In his previous life with Clara, Alex had dreaded it, the forced smiles, the hollow conversations, the pressure to impress people who measured a man's worth by the brand of his watch. This year, he decided to go alone. He paid for his own ticket, a single seat at a table near the back, sponsored by the small firm where he consulted. He wore a simple, well-tailored black suit that he'd owned for years. It was classic, understated, and in the sea of flashy, fashion-forward tuxedos, it made him almost invisible, which was precisely the point. He saw her across the grand ballroom. Clara was in her element. She wore a shimmering, backless gown of emerald green, a dress designed to be noticed. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her laughter bright and tinkling. Marcus, handsome and possessive, always at her side. She was holding court, surrounded by a circle of her friends, the same women who used to come to their house for brunch and whisper about their perfect life. Alex nursed a glass of sparkling water, content to be an observer. He watched as the city's mayor gave a speech, full of platitudes about community and generosity. He watched as the silent auction bids for golf weekends with local celebrities climbed to absurd heights. It was a world away from his apartment, with its corkboard walls and stacks of municipal codes. Eventually, the inevitable happened. During a lull in the program, Clara spotted him. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise, before her social mask snapped back into place. She whispered something to Marcus and her friends, and then the entire group began to drift in his direction, a predator pack closing in. "Alex, what a surprise to see you here," she said, her voice carrying across the nearby tables. Heads turned. "I didn't know your firm could afford a table." "It's a big table," Alex replied with a small smile, gesturing to the 10 empty chairs around him. He was the firm's sole representative. Her friends tittered. A woman named Jessica, whose face was a tight, unmoving testament to her dermatologist's skill, looked him up and down. "It's brave of you to come, Alex, after everything." "I support the hospital," he said simply. Clara looped her arm through Marcus's, pressing herself against his side. "I have to tell you all the funniest story," she said, projecting for the benefit of her audience. "Remember that awful piece of land my grandfather left me? The one out in the middle of nowhere?" She paused for effect, ensuring she had everyone's attention. Alex felt a familiar calm settle over him. He did not look away. He did not flinch. He held her gaze. "Well," she continued, "in the settlement I was so worried about poor Alex having nothing. I let him have it. I just gave it to him." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "And the other day my father's accountant, you know, the brilliant one Henry, he told me that Alex is probably paying more in property taxes on it than he pays for his apartment." The group erupted in laughter. It was cruel and sharp. It was the sound of a pack affirming its dominance over a lone wolf. Marcus put his arm around Clara's waist and squeezed. "My girl," he said, loud enough for Alex to hear. "Heart of gold, a little too generous for her own good, but that's why I love her." Clara leaned in closer to Alex, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was still loud enough for those nearby. "Seriously, Alex, sell it. Take my advice. Don't let your pride get in the way of common sense. There's no shame in starting over from scratch." She was painting a narrative, casting him as the proud, stubborn fool, and herself as the benevolent, all-knowing ex-wife. This was the pinnacle of his public humiliation, delivered on a silver platter in a room full of the city's most influential people. He was being defined, dismissed, and discarded in a single, perfectly executed social maneuver. Alex took a slow sip of his water. He set the glass down with a quiet, deliberate click. He looked past Clara, past Marcus, and let his gaze sweep over the faces of her friends, faces alight with amusement and pity. Then he smiled. It was not a pained or forced smile. It was a genuine, almost serene smile. It was the smile of a man who held a winning hand but chose not to show it. The smile said, "I know something you don't know." It was so out of place, so contrary to the role he had been assigned, that it momentarily silenced them. "Thank you for the concern, Clara," he said, his voice even and untroubled. "I'll manage." He then did something none of them expected. He stood up, pushed in his chair, and gave a polite nod. If you'll excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with." He walked away, leaving them in a cloud of confused silence. His departure was not a retreat, it was a dismissal. He hadn't been vanquished. He had simply grown bored of the conversation. He walked calmly through the ballroom, not toward the exit, but toward a corner where a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair was observing the crowd. Evelyn Reed watched him approach, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "That," she said as he reached her, "was quite the performance." "They have no idea," Alex said, his back to the group he had just left. "No, they don't," Evelyn agreed. She took a sip of her drink. "Let them have their fun. The laughter of the ignorant is the overture to the opera of their downfall." The preliminary engineering report was leaked to the deputy mayor's office this afternoon. "The news cycle starts tomorrow. Get some rest, Mr. Monroe. The storm breaks at dawn." The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a seismic shock, just a small item buried on page A7 of the city newspaper's local section, and a corresponding 3-minute segment on the morning news. The headline was innocuous: "City Council approves final route for Northern Gateway Transit Project." Clara saw it while sipping her morning latte in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of the house Alex had built. She was scrolling through her news feed, half paying attention to the television droning in the background. The anchor, a woman with aggressively cheerful energy, stood in front of a digital map of the county. "After years of debate and environmental studies," the anchor chirped, "the Northern Gateway is officially a go. The project is expected to bring thousands of jobs and represents the largest infrastructure investment in the county's history. The approved route will follow the old West Valley utility easement before cutting east." Clara wasn't really listening until a familiar name caught her ear. Creating a major commercial and residential hub in the area currently known as the North Valley. The key junction and the site of the main transit station will be centered on what old-timers still call the Vance property. Clara's hand froze halfway to her mouth. The latte cup hovered, forgotten. The Vance property? That was their name for it. The North Field, her grandfather's useless land. On the screen, the digital map zoomed in. A bright, pulsing red circle appeared, designating the location of the new hub. The circle encompassed a familiar, irregular shape, a 30-acre plot she had looked at on tax documents 100 times. "Land values in the adjacent parcels are expected to skyrocket overnight," the anchor continued, "with developers already scrambling to get a piece of what is being called the new heart of the city." The latte cup clattered into its saucer, splashing brown liquid onto the white marble countertop. Clara stared at the screen, her mind refusing to process the information. It was a mistake. It had to be. A different Vance property, a different Northfield. She scrambled for her laptop, her fingers fumbling on the keyboard. She pulled up the county assessor's website, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. She typed in the parcel number she had memorized from the divorce papers, the numbers she and her lawyer had laughed about. The map loaded. There it was, the 30-acre plot, outlined in blue. She switched back to the news channel's website, found the article, and looked at the official map they had posted. She dragged the two windows side by side on her screen. They were identical. The red, pulsing circle of the new city heart was drawn directly, perfectly, over the land she had given Alex. The land Marcus had called a tax liability. The land her father had said couldn't even support goats. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, began to creep up her spine. The gala. Alex's strange, serene smile. "I'll manage." His calmness in the lawyer's office. "That seems generous." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she couldn't bear to look at. He knew. The thought was a physical blow. He had known. When he signed those papers, when he walked away from the house and the money without a fight, he had known that the piece of paper he was taking was a winning lottery ticket. The entire settlement, her great victory, had been a sham. He hadn't been defeated. He had been executing a strategy. She hadn't been generous. She had been a fool. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The sun-drenched kitchen suddenly felt cold and claustrophobic. The beautiful marble, the custom cabinetry, the top-of-the-line appliances, it all felt like a stage set for a play in which she had just realized she was the clown. She snatched her phone, her hands trembling so badly she could barely unlock it. She scrolled to his name, Alex Monroe. She pressed the call button. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Each ring was an eternity, stretching her nerves tighter. On the 4th ring, it went to voicemail. Alex's voice, calm and professional, filled her ear. "You've reached Alex Monroe. I'm unable to take your call right now. Please leave a message." Beep. She hung up without leaving a message. What would she even say? Did you know? Did you trick me? The accusation sounded pathetic even in her own head. She had practically forced the land on him. She had mocked him for it. She tried again, straight to voicemail. He was screening her calls. The realization sent a fresh wave of panic through her. He was in control. For the first time in their entire relationship, she felt a complete and terrifying loss of power. She called her father. "Dad, did you see the news? The Gateway Project." "I saw," Richard said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't place. "Remarkable development." "The Vance property, Dad. It's our field, the one I gave to Alex." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, Clara," he finally said, his voice heavy. "I know which one it is." "What do I do?" she wailed, the facade of her composure finally cracking. "He knew. He must have known. He played me." "Clara," her father said, and for the first time she heard a note of genuine fear in his voice. "You need to talk to him. You need to fix this. Now." But Alex wasn't answering his phone. He was cutting her off, leaving her to marinate in her own dawning horror. The balance of their world had irrevocably shifted. The man she thought she had left in the dirt was now standing on a mountain of gold, and she was the one left looking up from the bottom, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. The panic that had been simmering in Clara's chest all morning boiled over. Voicemails were too passive. Emails were too easily ignored. This required a direct, face-to-face confrontation. She had to see his face, to read his expression, to wrench the control of the situation back into her hands. She didn't bother changing out of her expensive yoga pants and cashmere sweater. She grabbed her car keys, stormed out of the house Alex built, and got into the pearl-white convertible Marcus had leased for her. She drove with reckless, frantic energy, breaking speed limits, her mind racing faster than the car. She sped away from the manicured lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs of her wealthy enclave and pointed the car toward the gritty, industrial heart of downtown, towards Alex's apartment. Finding a parking spot on the busy street was a nightmare. She ended up leaving the convertible half in a loading zone, its pristine white paint job looking absurdly out of place against the graffiti-covered brick. She didn't care. She ran to the entrance of his building, the one she had looked at with such disdain just weeks ago. The smell of the laundromat, a mixture of cheap detergent and hot, damp air, assaulted her as she pushed through the door. It smelled like poverty, she thought. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breath catching in her throat, her expensive sneakers slapping against the worn linoleum. She found his door, 3B, and began pounding on it with the flat of her hand. "Alex! Alex, open this door, we need to talk." She waited, her ear pressed against the cheap wood. Silence. "I know you're in there, Alex. Don't you dare hide from me. Open the door." Finally, she heard the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a few inches, stopped by a security chain. Alex's face appeared in the gap. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and glasses. He looked calm, rested. He looked like he had been expecting her. The sight of his placid expression sent a fresh surge of fury through her. "Let me in," she demanded. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. "Why?" he asked. The question was simple, but it disarmed her completely. What do you mean, why? We have to talk about the field. The news, Alex. Did you see the news? I'm aware of the municipal development plans, yes, he said, his voice maddeningly level. You knew, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at him. You knew this whole time. You let me give it to you. You let me think. Let you think what, Clara? He asked, his eyes holding hers through the gap in the door. That the land was worthless? You've been telling me that for 10 years. You and your father and your friends. I'm not sure what I was supposed to do to correct a belief you all held so strongly. The chess match had begun. He had just made the opening move, and it was a check. He was using her own words, her own arrogance against her. This is not a game, Alex. Isn't it? He countered. It felt like a game when you offered me $200 in front of your new boyfriend. It felt like a game at the gala when you told your friends how you'd saddled me with a useless tax burden. You set the rules, Clara. I'm just playing with the hand I was dealt. Desperation began to claw at her. Okay, you win. You're clever. You're a genius. Now what are we going to do about it? We? The word hung in the air between them. There is no we anymore, Clara. We signed papers to that effect. You made sure of it. He was dismantling her, piece by piece, with quiet, devastating logic. Every assumption she had about her own power, her own right to control the narrative, was being systematically stripped away. Alex, please, she said, her voice breaking. The anger was dissolving into fear. That land has been in my family for generations. It's my heritage. Your heritage was a punchline until this morning, he stated, not cruelly, but as a simple matter of fact. You called it God's most stubborn mistake. You were desperate to get it off the books. Now it's your sacred heritage? I made a mistake, she cried, tears welling in her eyes. These were real tears, not the performative kind she was used to. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I don't know what you want me to say. He was silent for a moment, studying her. He seemed to be weighing something. Finally, he spoke. I want you to go home, Clara. No, not until we sort this out. What are you going to do with it? Sell it? You have to give me a chance to buy it back. I'll get a loan from my father. I'll give you a profit, a handsome profit. Alex almost smiled. A handsome profit on an asset whose value she couldn't even begin to comprehend. That won't be possible, he said. Why not? She demanded. Because it's not for sale, he said. Not in the way you think. He unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. He wasn't inviting her in. He was preparing to close it. This conversation is over, Clara. If you want to discuss this further, you can have your lawyer contact mine, though I believe you'll find my lawyer is a bit more formidable these days. He gestured vaguely back into his apartment. On the corkboard wall, visible over his shoulder, Clara could see a name and number pinned under the heading, Partner. It read, Evelyn Reed. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Evelyn Reed, the shark, the most ruthless and successful developer in the state. Alex wasn't just sitting on a valuable piece of land, he was partnered with a titan. The full, terrifying scope of the situation finally crashed down on her. Alex wasn't just a man who got lucky, he was a player. He had been moving pieces on a board she hadn't even known existed. The man she had dismissed as a simple, plodding builder of things was in fact a master architect of a reality she could no longer control. Alex, wait, she began, but it was too late. He looked at her one last time, his expression not of anger or triumph, but of something far more devastating. Finality. Goodbye, Clara. The door closed with a quiet click, leaving her alone in the dingy hallway, the smell of bleach and defeat thick in the air. 2 days later, an email arrived from an address she didn't recognize, e.reed@reeddevelopment.com. The subject line was succinct, Meeting Re North Valley Parcel 7A. The body of the email was equally brief. Ms. Vance, Mr. Monroe has agreed to meet with you to discuss the disposition of the aforementioned parcel. The meeting will take place tomorrow, Friday, at 10 a.m. at the offices of Reed Development, 4500 Skyline Tower, 50th floor. Our legal counsel will be present. We request that you bring yours. E. Reed. The use of her maiden name Vance was a small, sharp jab, a reminder that her connection to Alex, the name Monroe, was legally severed. The formal, intimidating tone of the email made it clear. This was not a negotiation between ex-spouses. This was a corporate transaction, and she was being summoned to the lion's den. Clara, her father Richard, and her lawyer, the one with the sharp jawline who now looked profoundly uneasy, arrived at the 50th floor exactly at 10 a.m. The Reed Development offices were a testament to power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of the entire city. The furniture was minimalist and brutally expensive. The air was thin and smelled of money and ambition. They were shown into a large, glass-walled conference room. Alex was already there, seated at the head of a massive granite table. He was not alone. To his right sat Evelyn Reed, her silver hair coiled in an impeccable chignon, her eyes missing nothing. To his left sat a team of 3 lawyers, their briefcases open, their faces impassive. Alex himself looked different. The simple suit he'd worn to the gala was gone, replaced by a bespoke, charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly. He looked comfortable. He looked like he belonged there. He stood as they entered, a gesture of politeness that felt like a power move. "Clara, Richard," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for coming." The tension in the room was thick enough to be measured in atmospheres. Clara's lawyer began with a blustering attempt to set the terms. "Now see here, my client is prepared to make a generous offer to repurchase the land, to correct what is obviously a gross misunderstanding from the divorce settlement." Evelyn Reed cut him off with a single raised finger, not even bothering to look at him. "Your client is not here to make offers, counsel. She is here to listen to one." She slid a thick, bound document across the granite table. It landed in front of Clara with a heavy, definitive thud. The cover read, "North Gateway Hub, a development proposal by Monroe Reed Ventures." "As you now know," Alex began, his voice filling the silent room, "the North Field is the keystone of the city's largest development project in 50 years. Its standalone value for immediate sale to a third party has been appraised at $9.2 million. Clara gasped. Richard's face went pale. $9.2 million. The number was breathtaking, obscene. "However," Alex continued, holding up a hand, "we are not interested in a standalone sale. As Ms. Reed mentioned when we first spoke, the person who holds the keystone doesn't just sell it. They get to approve the design of the whole arch." He opened the proposal. Inside were detailed architectural renderings, financial projections, and site plans. It was the work from his apartment, now rendered in stunning, professional detail. It was his vision. "Monroe Reed Ventures," he explained, "is not selling the land. We are leveraging it. We are taking the lead position on the entire 500-acre development. Our stake in the completed project is projected to be—" He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Considerably more than $9.2 million. The room was silent, save for the sound of Richard's labored breathing. Clara felt lightheaded. This was so much bigger, so much more complex than she had ever imagined. She finally found her voice, a small, pleading whisper. "Alex, why are you doing this?" Alex leaned forward, his calm expression finally hardening into something sharp and focused. This was it, the moment of reckoning. "I'm doing this, Clara, because you never listened," he began, his voice low but carrying the weight of a decade of slights. "This isn't about the money, not for me. It's about this." He tapped the cover of the proposal. "The work, the vision, something I tried to share with you and you dismissed it as boring maps. while you worried about caterers. He looked from her to her father. It's for every time you, Richard, called me the boy behind my back, as if I were a temporary employee in my own marriage. It's for every condescending remark about my modest background, as if integrity and hard work were quaint hobbies instead of foundational principles. His gaze returned to Clara, and it was devastatingly clear. It's for the night of the gala, when you stood me up in front of your friends and painted me as a charity case. For the story you told about saddling me with this useless land, as if it were a final act of pity. You weren't being generous, Clara. You were being cruel. You just weren't skilled enough to know which weapon you were handing me. He paused, letting the list of grievances hang in the air. This was the quiet bomb, the softly spoken revelation that recontextualized everything. And it's for the $200, he said, his voice dropping even further. The day you and Marcus found me at my apartment, you offered me $200, a public performance of your magnanimity, to cement my status as the man you had discarded, a pittance to make you feel large and me feel small. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm authority. Evelyn Reed watched him, a glimmer of profound respect in her eyes. My lawyers have advised me against any kind of financial settlement with you. They see it as a potential liability, Alex said. But I am a man of my word. I believe in fairness. A tiny, desperate flicker of hope ignited in Clara's chest. So I will make you an offer, Alex said, his eyes locking with hers. A gesture, to show that I have moved on and that I wish you no specific ill will. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a personal checkbook. He uncapped a pen, and with a flourish, he wrote on the check. He tore it out and slid it across the vast, polished table. It fluttered to a stop in front of her. Clara looked down. The check was made out to her. Clara Vance. The amount written on it was $200. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a perfect, crushing act of poetic justice. It was not a gesture of reconciliation. It was a final, irrefutable statement of her irrelevance. He had taken her most pointed insult and mirrored it back to her, an echo that would reverberate through the rest of her life. He wasn't just winning, he was teaching, and the lesson was brutal. The aftermath was not a sudden, explosive event, but a slow, grinding collapse. The beautiful world Clara had built for herself, propped up by status and the perception of wealth, began to crumble at its foundations. The story of the meeting at Reed Development and the legendary $200 check spread through the city's elite circles like a virus. It was too delicious, too perfect a piece of gossip to be contained. First, Marcus disappeared. His departure was as swift and silent as his arrival had been loud and ostentatious. The venture capitalist, the man who claimed to be 10 steps ahead of the market, had failed to see the most significant paradigm shift in his own girlfriend's life. He was an investor in status, and Clara's stock had just crashed. 1 week he was at her side, his arm possessively around her waist. The next, the pearl-white convertible was gone, his clothes were gone from the closet, and his calls went unanswered. He had moved on to his next, more promising investment. Next, the house began to feel less like a palace and more like a prison. Without Marcus's contributions and with her boutique bleeding money, it turned out that a good eye was no substitute for a business plan. Clara found she could no longer afford the mortgage and upkeep on her own. The home Alex had designed, the one she had fought so hard to keep as a symbol of her victory, became an albatross. She was forced to put it on the market. The ultimate irony was that the agent she hired kept mentioning how much more it would be worth if it were just a few miles north, near the new Gateway Hub development. Her friends, the flock of women who had surrounded her at the gala, began to distance themselves. Their calls became less frequent. Invitations to brunch and weekend trips dried up. They were, like Marcus, drawn to the gravitational pull of success and power. Alex, the man they had pitied and mocked, was now the center of a new, more powerful solar system. Stories circulated about the Monroe Reed Ventures project, the innovative design, the billions in projected revenue. Alex was no longer Clara's failed ex-husband. He was the visionary architect of the city's future. Clara, by contrast, was becoming a ghost of her former self, a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, were caught in their own private hell. Richard's reputation as a savvy, old-money patriarch was shattered. He, the man who claimed he could spot a worthless parcel a mile away, had been blind to the gold mine in his own family's portfolio. His peers now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He had been outmaneuvered by the son-in-law he had never respected. They attempted one last, desperate appeal. They invited Alex to dinner, back to the same formal dining room where they had once allowed him to be ridiculed. This time, there was no Marcus, no poached pears, no condescending laughter. The air was thick with desperation. "Alex," Richard began, his voice strained, "what's done is done. You were clever. We underestimated you. I admit that." "It wasn't about being clever, Richard," Alex said, calmly sipping his water. "It was about paying attention. Your mother-in-law, Eleanor and I," he corrected himself hastily, "we are worried about Clara. She's not herself. She's lost everything. The house, Marcus, her spirit." "She hasn't lost everything, Richard," Alex replied. "She has simply found the true level of the things she valued." Eleanor, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice trembling. "But she was your wife. Don't you feel any responsibility, any lingering affection? Can't you help her? Set up a trust, give her a small piece of the project, a finder's fee, anything." Alex set his glass down. He looked at the two of them, their faces etched with anxiety, not for Clara's well-being, but for the family's social standing. They were not grieving for their daughter. They were managing a public relations crisis. "Let me ask you both a question," he said, his tone shifting from patient to probing. "Where was this concern when Clara was humiliating me? Where were you when she was offering me pity money on the street? Where was your sense of family loyalty when you sat at this very table and laughed as your guest, Marcus, called my portion of the settlement a worthless joke?" He paused, letting the questions land. "You weren't just silent enablers, you were active participants. You enjoyed it. You saw it as the natural order of things, the strong and wealthy triumphing over the quiet and modest. The only problem is that you misidentified who was who." He stood up, placing his napkin on the table. The meal was untouched. "Clara is your daughter. You are right to be worried about her. But her current situation is not my fault, and it is not my responsibility to fix. It is the direct consequence of her own choices, choices you encouraged and celebrated. If you want to help her, teach her what you failed to teach her the first time. That character is more valuable than currency, and that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit." He walked out of their house for the last time, leaving them in the silent, cavernous dining room with the bill for their own arrogance finally coming due. The consequences were playing out, not as a sudden act of vengeance, but as the slow, inevitable grinding of the wheels of poetic justice. Everyone was getting exactly what they had invested in. A year passed. The seasons turned, and the Northfield was transformed. The weeds and rocks were gone, replaced by the orderly chaos of a massive construction site. The air hummed with the sounds of progress, the roar of earth movers, the clang of steel on steel, the shouts of workers. At the center of it all stood a sleek, modern architectural office, the on-site headquarters for Monroe Reed Ventures. From his office window, Alex could see the skeleton of the new city rising from the earth. The foundations for the transit station were being poured. The first steel beams of the central office tower reached toward the sky. It was more than just buildings. It was the physical manifestation of a vision, a community being born from a blueprint that had once lived only on his corkboard wall. He was no longer the quiet, underestimated man. He was Alex Monroe, the visionary, the name on everyone's lips. He was featured in magazines, interviewed on television, and courted by politicians and investors. But the fame and the wealth felt secondary, like byproducts of the real work. The real reward was the work itself, the problem-solving, the creation, the act of bringing something of lasting value into the world. He had maintained his moral high ground. He had not become cruel or vindictive. The $200 check had not been an act of pettiness, but an act of closure, a final, perfectly calibrated response that ended the game on his terms. He had no more contact with Clara or her family. They had faded from his life, relegated to a past he no longer dwelled on. One afternoon, Evelyn Reed walked into his office and dropped a file on his desk. Legal just flagged this, a final piece of loose paperwork from the divorce. An old retirement account you two had. It's got about $75,000 in it. Your lawyer says it's legally half yours, but since she's declared bankruptcy, her creditors are going to claw back her half. You need to sign to release your portion before the whole thing gets frozen in litigation. Alex looked at the file. Clara had declared bankruptcy. He hadn't known. He felt a brief, distant pang of something, not pity, but a sense of the immense waste of it all. He thought for a moment. He could take his half, the $37,000, and never think about it again. It was his, legally and morally. But it felt wrong. It felt like taking a final pound of flesh from an opponent who had long since been defeated. Evelyn, he said, pushing the file back across the desk, can our lawyers create an anonymous trust? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Anonymous how? Completely anonymous, Alex said. No link to me, no link to Monroe Reed. Have them structure it so this entire account, all $75,000, is put into it. The trust will be designated to pay for career counseling and retraining for a single, unnamed female beneficiary in this county who has recently filed for personal bankruptcy. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. The paperwork will be a nightmare, and the beneficiary will be her. The beneficiary will be a person who needs a chance to start over, Alex corrected her gently. It's not a handout, it's an opportunity. The same kind of opportunity I got. She can use it or not. The choice will be hers. But the offer will be there, free from the weight of history. Evelyn's sharp features softened into a rare, genuine smile. You, Mr. Monroe, are a very unusual kind of businessman. I'm an architect, he said. I believe in building strong foundations. Later that evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows from the rising towers, Alex walked out onto the site. He stood on the spot where the central plaza would be, a green space with fountains and benches, a place for people to gather. He breathed in the cool evening air, thick with the smell of damp earth and possibility. He had his vindication. He had his success. But standing there, he realized the true victory wasn't in Clara's downfall or his own rise. It was in the quiet, unshakable knowledge of his own worth, a knowledge that had been there all along, long before the land was valuable, long before the world took notice. True wealth wasn't the number in a bank account. It was the integrity in your heart and the vision in your mind. It was the strength to endure humiliation with dignity, to answer arrogance with quiet competence, and to have the grace to build a future, not just for yourself, but for everyone. The journey from a small apartment to the head of a multi-billion-dollar project had taught him that the most valuable assets are never listed on a settlement agreement. They are patience, integrity, and the quiet, stubborn belief that you know the true value of the ground on which you stand. What did you think of Alex's final act of grace? Was it true justice, or should he have just walked away? We all face moments where we are underestimated, and it's stories like these that remind us of the power of quiet strength. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of vindication and quiet triumph.